This overview of the steps and tools to support root cause analysis should take about 15 minutes to complete. As a reminder, target setting plays a critical role in Colorado's Unified Improvement Planning approach. It builds from the school's priority performance challenges and provides the foundation for ongoing progress monitoring of the impact of the improvement plan on student performance as it is implemented. Performance targets describe how much is enough improvement over time. They further focus improvement efforts by allowing teams to check on the results of their efforts across the school year. Performance targets should be set for the next 2 school years. There is no statutory penalty for schools failing to meet their performance targets. However, districts can use evidence that schools have met their performance targets as part of any request for the state to reconsider school plan type assignments. The process of setting performance targets includes the following steps. Number 1, focus on one priority performance challenge at a time. Number 2, identify associated measures and metrics that will be used for target setting. Number 3, determine a comparison point. Number 4, determine the gap between current performance and the comparison point that would represent improvement for the school. Number 5, determine a time frame for closing the gap and the progress needed in the next 2 years. And number 6, describe annual performance targets for the next 2 years. We'll start with a few notes on the focus of performance targets, the school's priority performance challenges. As a reminder, priority performance challenges should describe a challenge related to the performance of students at a school. Priority performance challenges must identify for every performance indicator area where performance did not meet state expectations. Typically, priority performance challenges incorporate more than one related notable trend. As a result, one priority performance challenge could address more than one performance indicator area, such as when the performance challenge relates to both growth and achievement in a content area. Improvement plans should focus on 3 to at most 5 priority performance challenges. Every performance target is specific to a priority performance challenge. This means the process of setting performance targets should focus on one priority performance challenge at a time. Ultimately, however, a performance target must be established for every priority performance challenge. In addition, the READ Act requires schools to establish performance targets for K-3 literacy and report these targets in their UIPs. These targets must be included whether or not K-3 literacy is a priority performance challenge for the school. Once it has been determined which priority performance challenge will be the focus of the performance target, then it is time to specify the measures or metrics that will be used in the performance target. There are 2 levels of metrics, individual and group. Some examples of student groups include all students in the school district, all students in a grade level, students in a disaggregated group, and students in a classroom. What level of metrics do we use for UIP target setting? Group metrics are aggregates of individual metrics, such as mean, median, percent, and sum. Comparison points. What is a comparison point? Data to which schools or districts' performance can be compared, to determine how good is good enough performance, for analyzing data and setting performance targets. Comparison points can be criterion or norm referenced. Criterion is how did we compare to a specific expectation. Norm referenced is how did we compare to others, such as comparison to the state. Norm reference scores often embed the comparison point in the score itself. Priority performance challenges and thus performance targets are associated with specific measures and metrics. Follow these steps when selecting the measures and metrics to use in performance targets. Number 1, use state-required measures and metrics if those metrics will be available during the time frame for the performance target. Number 2, specify alternatives for state-required metrics that are not available, for example, during the state assessment transition. And number 3, consider if it would be helpful to set targets for and track on additional actionable measures or metrics that are also associated with the priority performance challenge. CDE has identified required measures and metrics for each performance indicator and sub-indicator. These are the measures and metrics used in the school performance framework. Because the state assessment is the required measure for several performance indicators and sub-indicators, many of the required metrics will be changing during the state assessment transition. However, not all required metrics are changing. Specifically, measures or metrics that are not changing include those associated with post-secondary and workforce readiness and academic growth and English language proficiency. Districts may or may not be changing their K-3 literacy assessment during this same time frame. However, metrics and comparison points have already been established for all the state-approved K-3 literacy assessments and will not be changing during this time frame. Finally, measures and metrics for academic achievement in science and social studies with state comparison points will be available and should be used for target setting beginning in the 2015-2016 school year. Some metrics and comparison points that the state typically provides for academic achievement, growth, and growth gaps in reading and writing and math will not be available for the 2015-2016 school year. In order to set targets, it will be important to understand minimum state expectations for each of the metrics included in the school and district performance framework reports. This information is available on the 3rd and 4th pages of the school performance framework reports. These pages are excerpted as a separate UIP tool. Take a few minutes to identify what value of each of the metrics would meet minimum state expectations. When state-required metrics are not available, as is the case during the state assessment transition, schools and districts should consider alternative measures and metrics for target setting. In June of 2014, CDE released the document Implications and Guidance for the UIP during the state assessment transition. This guidance focuses on target setting during the assessment transition and identifies 3 options for schools and districts. The first option is to use locally administered assessment instruments that align with Colorado academic standards and set performance targets using the metrics that are part of the instrument. This option may be closely aligned with what schools have been doing in using locally administered interim assessment instruments for progress monitoring of UIPs. Both vendors and CDE have identified comparison points that could be used in target setting with these measures. An alternative approach for setting performance targets for academic achievement would be to use the school's percentile ranking on the newly administered state assessments as a metric. This is similar to the approach CDE used to establish cut scores for the levels of achievement on the CSAP TCAP that meets state expectations as described in the SPF. This approach can also be used before the state has established cut scores on the new state tests. The final option is to build solutions into the action plan that will ensure the school can set targets in subsequent years. Using interim assessment results. The 5 most commonly used in Colorado include Acuity, Galileo, NWEA Maps, Scantron Performance Series, and STAR. Assessment instrument descriptions for each include available aggregate metrics and 2 sources of comparison points, vendor and CDE points of comparison for request to reconsider. Consider additional actionable metrics. Planning teams can set performance targets for additional metrics. Additional metrics should clearly relate to the performance indicators. Required state PWR metrics have a 1-year lag in reporting. Additional PWR metrics: 4, 5, 6, and 7-year completion rates, percent of students earning a year's worth of credits in a year's time, career and technical education course completion rate, number and percentage of students successfully transitioning into a recognized adult education program, percent or number of students enrolling in a Colorado post-secondary institution within 1 year after graduation, percent of recent graduates attending Colorado public institutions that required remediation, APIB participation, percent or number of students scoring high enough on the APIB test to receive college credit, and ACT scores by content areas. The next step is to determine the gap. Once metrics and comparison points have been identified, the gap between the school's performance and the comparison point can be determined. It simply involves noting the school's current level of performance for the priority performance challenge on that metric or those metrics, considering the relevant comparison point and then subtracting the difference. That is the gap between current performance and the desired performance. Once the gap has been determined, it is time to determine the time frame for closing the gap and how much progress can be made in the next 2 years. Schools with priority improvement or turnaround plan type assignments are on the accountability clock. The time on the accountability clock for schools with priority improvement and turnaround assignments are indicated on the form of the school SPF. According to state statute, no school can receive these plan type designations for more than 5 years, but the state can take action for any school receiving a turnaround plan type assignment for 3 years. A school's plan type and how long the length of time on the accountability clock could be a determiner for the time frame for the performance targets. The time frame to meet minimum state expectations will be in part determined by how long a school has been on the accountability clock. Schools not on the accountability clock have discretion in determining the time frame for their performance targets. The state provides some guidance for determining the time frame for meeting performance targets. The time frame should move schools towards meeting the minimum state expectations as quickly as possible. This means the time frame should be ambitious but attainable. Median growth percentiles can increase very quickly. Increasing the percent and number of students meeting proficiency or mastery may take longer. The overall time frame determines progress needed in the next 2 school years. Schools can determine if they believe their rate of improvement will not be constant. The final steps are describe annual performance targets for the next 2 years. The actual performance target statement includes the following information. The metric to which the target applies should include the content area if appropriate. For example, dropout rate or median growth percentile for mathematics. The students to which the target applies, including grade levels and disaggregated groups. For example, all students in grades 9 through 12, or K through 5 students identified as English language learners. The current performance on the measure, for example, 4% dropout rate. Endpoint of the change in performance on the metric, for example, 3%. And the year to which the target applies, for example, 2015 to 2016.